What is up, everyone? Once again, it's your boy Curly Tlapoyawa with yet another episode of Café con Nahuatl. In this episode, I wanted to answer a question that I get asked quite a bit, and that is, why do you spell Nahuatl words the way that you do? For example, you'll notice that the name of this video series is Café con Nahuatl, with Nahuatl spelled Nawatl. And this might be confusing for people who are not used to seeing it spelled this way or are used to seeing Nahuatl spelled a different way. And I think that this deserves to be addressed. So, first of all, we need to understand that there is no standardized orthography or way of writing for the Nahuatl language. Instead, we have a variety of orthographies that were used in the colonial period and other orthographies or ways of writing that continue to be used today by modern Nahuatl speakers. And these orthographies can basically be grouped into one of two categories. We have colonial orthographies and modern orthographies. In a colonial orthography, this is, if you're studying what they call classical Nahuatl, this is probably what you're used to seeing written down. The way that these came to be used is that the Spanish priests who were put in charge of recording the Nahuatl language sat down and just listened and transcribed what they were hearing using Latin characters to the best of their ability. You see, Nahuatl obviously was not a written language, and it certainly wasn't written using using Latin characters. So the priests were put in charge of creating a way of writing the Nahuatl language. But even then, these priests didn't really communicate with each other, so each one sort of came up with their own way of writing words in Nahuatl. For example, take the word siwat, which is woman. If you're reading if you're reading books that were written using the colonial orthography, you might see siwat written in one of these ways. And as you can see, it's a variety of ways that they were written. Contrasted with this, you have modern Nahuatl orthographies, and these are styles of writing that are mainly used by modern speakers of the language. And a lot of these you'll see are based more on an intuitive way of writing. They write out the words in a way that helps facilitate correct pronunciation of the language, or you just write it out in a way that you're used to seeing it that will help you pronounce the words correctly. So, take that same example, siwat, using a modern orthography, you might see siwat spelled one of these ways. And ultimately, it's up to you which style of writing you want to use. Inevitably, somebody's going to approach you and say, I don't like the way you're writing that, or how come you're not doing it this way, or you're doing it wrong. These tend to be people who have never actually studied the language and who do not interact with modern speakers of the language. Personally, I like to use a modern orthography that I see being used today by modern speakers, native speakers of the language. And in the 1940s, in the newspaper, the Nahuatl language newspaper Mexicayotl, there was a quote that read, Inin totlachtol oxe, tleca tiquiquiloske kemen castilan. And this translates roughly to, this language of ours is different. Why should we write it as if it were Spanish? And this perspective came from native speakers rejecting Spanish colonial orthographies as a way of resistance, as a way of making the style of writing their own. And personally, I agree with this 100%. Now, you don't have to agree with this. What I recommend is study all of the orthographies, look into them, and pick the one that works best for you, and just be consistent with it. But mainly, what I hope you do is take the time to learn an indigenous language, whether it's Nahuatl or any of the other 68 living, modern, indigenous languages present in Mexico today. So this, I hope you found it helpful. This has been another episode of Café con Nahuatl. Tlasokamati Welmiak, Timotaske.